focus on this strategy of making paths or making networks, and how making networks could how making networks. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. How making networks could be a strategy that could be a spatial strategy to further stabilize the centralities we had before, and in two scales, metropolitan and local scales. Oh, I forgot to mention that there was a kind of belief in the central flow theorists that they think there was kind of historical transition from the old cities to our contemporary urban life, that it used to be that the wall and the gates start to regulate our daily movement in the city, but now it's more like open networks that plays a dominant role. So there's kind of transition from the logic of central play theory to central flow theory, and I'm doubting if it is true. That's also a kind of a question I bear in mind in the next part of the research. And first, I need to explain how this scale structure in movement networks was articulated and constituted. It is defined by multiple technologies, multiple movement regulation technologies in history. So in all the cities, historical traditional cities, there was a kind of, for instance, there are many systems that can show the space are different. Certain streets are used for traveling in between different cities. Certain space are used for traveling just in between neighborhood, and certain streets are being designed or used only for the travelers inside the neighborhood. That could be reflected from the name of the street. For instance, in Chinese we say 大街, which means great street, 小街, little street, 巷 and 胡同. There is a kind of hierarchical structure in the way that street being named. So this map is showing that kind of structure, and that kind of structure also can be reflected from the way that's being artificially paved. For instance, important street being paved with expensive, dedicated stones and it's wider, and the minor street are somehow being unpaved or just paved with soil. And this can also, we can see from the way that this gated structure, as I showed before, being placed. So some important street, we have well-decorated gated structure with more entrances, but some minor streets with very simple gated structure. So from this, we can see similar structures. And also we have other technologies like space syntax and other and configurational techniques to show this kind of differences. And also for the regional scale, we can see similar examples. This map shows the different type of pavement, and in comparing with the space syntax maps. And I have studied different type of transportation technologies, like development of the railway, highway, and on this map I only show the development of buses. For instance, it's not as simple as say that railway represent a kind of regional or national scale movement, because, for instance, the bus initially was planned as a city bus, suburban bus, and regional bus, which is used for traveling between the satellite town and Beijing. So each transportation mode doesn't fit to one type of scale structure, let's say. And this map shows development of bus system and the different connectivities between the neighborhood during that period based on the bus system. And another thing I want to say is when we compare with the centralities, or let's say the commercial gathering of commercial functions, for instance, when we only looking at how each neighborhood is being connected by bus system, we can say in 1980s is fit very well with the distribution of the shops, because on that moment, people's movement are really very much depends on this public transport. Very few people have private cars, so they would only use bikes and buses. So this logic is quite clear. But what we have now is somehow the bus lose certain kind of importance to reflect the distribution of these commercial activities, because now we have more choices. Let's say the metro system play a more important role than this. So to analyze this condition, we need to consider multiple transportation systems together. And I would say that the scale structure is this kind of potential tool to analyze the distribution of the center, because it's being developed based on sorting different type of transportation networks into scales, into the way that is being used. And this map represents the city scale, the movement network of Beijing on city scale. The thick lines representing the type of spaces being used for longer distance traveling, like traveling in region, in between cities, while the thinner lines represent the kind of spaces traveling inside a city. In the same way, we can see it in how it's being developed in the regional scale. And in this sense, I'm trying to use this spatial model as a tool to analyze the changing centralities as a kind of potential spatial model to analyze the spatial logic for the changing centralities in two distinct scales. One is metropolitan and the other is the local. And this is the changing metropolitan scale centers in these two distinct years. And when I superimpose this data on the movement network, what I see is even in the old city, traditional city, which is clearly defined by walls, the center activities, the commercial activities, still are not gathering on the gateway. For instance, this kind of the gates between the inside and outside. It is very much located on a kind of interface between the external movements and the internal movements. To put it in detail, it's actually located on a kind of a ring structure. This ring structure is a kind of intermediate spaces between the movement of higher scale, that's a kind of movement traveling between cities, and the internal movement. It's actually the center of the internal movement, because in the geometrical center of Beijing is Forbidden City, so you cannot really travel through that. This kind of logic, actually, we can see it from the later development as well. This kind of ring structure is just growing bigger and bigger with the rescaling of the city. In this sense, I think this kind of interface logic has the potential to also, I'm trying to test if this kind of interface logic could be founded in a kind of local scale instead of metropolitan scale. And therefore, in this part of the research, I'm focusing only the local scale centers. The definition of these local scale centers is based on a kind of gathering of local people and the local-based commercial activities like grocery stores, small food markets,